Hey everybody, Silong Chhun here, and I'm a candidate for Tacoma City Council representing District 4. And today we are with Downtown on the Go on 56th and Portland Avenue, getting ready to get on this bus route 54, to see where it takes us. My family and I came here as refugees in 1981, and we settled here in Tacoma. I grew up in Salishan, went to Lissa Elementary School, went to McElvey Middle School, and graduated from Lincoln High School. So I've walked these streets, known the struggles of this community, and made this community my home ever since. I'm now raising my kids here. My son just graduated from Lincoln High School, which I'm really proud of. And I'm just so fortunate and honored to have the privilege to be in this race to represent the community that I grew up in and the community that raised me. So let's go. Yeah, I would definitely support the measure. I was really disappointed it didn't pass the first time, but I don't blame the community members or neighbors for not passing it, because I don't think the city government of Tacoma did enough outreach to kind of inform the importance of the investment. But I would absolutely support if the initiative come back on the ballot. What I will do as a community member, not even just a council member, just a regular community member, is just talk to my neighbors and accentuate how important it is to invest in infrastructure, because for the long term, we're talking about public safety, a place where families can thrive, public infrastructure for public transportation and biking, all that good stuff. It's all important. So what I would prioritize is, enhancing safety and I would love to see safety expanded near the school zones and parks and high risk corridors, right? And I will also prioritize access for the ADA compliance and ability. And also, there's a neighbor that lives around my neighborhood that I see all the time, who is he's blind, right? He's walking around with a cane stick, and you're more than welcome. Hi, how you doing? Yeah, and I see him. I haven't had the chance, an opportunity to speak with him, but when I'm traveling, riding on my bus, I see him getting on the bus, but he's blind. So I would love to have a conversation with him and do a deeper dive on how we can accommodate and support and be more inclusive of folks who have vision challenges like himself. But he seems to be able to, navigate himself pretty freely and independently, which is highly impressive. So that's one of the things that I think is often overlooked, is not just, ADA compliant sidewalks and opportunities to have folks gain access to public transportation, but how can we be more inclusive with folks who have vision challenges like that? So I would prioritize that: safety near school corridors, parks, enhanced for ADA compliance and access. And then, I would advocate for more, because in my experience speaking with my neighbors when I'm knocking on doors, I think one of the biggest issues that they hear is speeding in the neighborhood. So, I live right by Sheridan Elementary School, where there's a stop sign on one side of the road, and it's not a four-way stop. So people blow through that stop sign all the time. So a huge safety measure I would do is really advocate and find funding for more roundabouts, more stop signs, and more visible street signs. I know we're down to 20 miles an hour, but nobody really follows that. So maybe looking at mechanisms on how we can better enforce speeding limitations without punishing those who, violate those laws. That'll be my priority: school safety, walking to school, and then lower priority, how do we invest more bike lanes? Is should be a goal for every single community member here in Tacoma to get to zero traffic accidents, which is clearly impossible, but that shouldn't stop us from making the effort. But what I would do is look at the data, see where the high-risk corridors are, and figure out what we need to do. I'm not an expert in traffic safety or anything like that, so what I would do is gather all the experts who knows what they're talking about, and so I can be more informed to make a better decision. But given the question today, what I would do is figure out where the high-risk corridors are, where the traffic are, and figure out what we need to do. Do we need to add more roundabouts? Do we need to add more lights? Do we need to add a couple more stop signs? Do we need to get stop signs with lights around it so we can have more visible city signs so folks can pay more attention to slow down? I think speeding is a huge issue. Like I said, constituents, when I knock on a door, that's what I hear the most is people's feet all the time, and we have, a lot of young kids and youth who are doing these burnouts around the neighborhood. It happens all the time near my house. I live near a school, so what I would do to really advocate for that is to look into Tacoma City annual budget and advocate and champion for the investments here, right here in our District 4, where our high risk corridors are, and on the council, not just on the council, as a community member too. I think the role of the city is to better educate and inform the community members on how important these investments in our infrastructure is to keep our community safe. So that's what I would do to advocate for Vision Zero to reach our goal. Yeah, that's a tough question to answer, because one of our most consistent and reliable funding sources are raising and increasing taxes, no matter how high or how low. Our neighbors, myself, I don't like taxes either, but I understand that's what we need to continue to invest in our communities and keep our infrastructures intact and updated and safe. So one of the funding mechanisms is just look at possible, tax revenue from different areas. I'm not sure that the Tacoma have a tourist tax. When we have tourists come here to Tacoma Dome and visit our communities, how can we boost tourism so we can bring more tax dollars to have more people spend their money here? We have so many great amenities like the Point Defiance Park, the Point Wrestling, so there's a huge opportunity to get more foot traffic to Tacoma and the tourism. So that's one way we can raise funds through taxes. I think the City Council just recently voted to raise property taxes. But where families, especially in District 4, are already constrained. They're working 2-3 jobs, struggling to pay their bills. So if we do decide to raise taxes, I think as a city government, city body, we have to do a better job at communicating how important these investments are. And at the long term, it's going to be cheaper in the long run for everybody, because everyone's safer. We can bring more, foot traffic for tourism. And another thing that I would look at is where can we find grants, right? Or matching funds, or grants or loans with low, what is that, interest? Yeah, loans with low interest rates, right? We can find loans maybe from the federal government, maybe not in the next 4 years, but after this current administration. But also, we need to tax the rich. We have a lot of folks in Tacoma who I've seen Lamborghinis and Maseratis on the road and Point Wrestling in the north end. I don't think we should be afraid to look into opportunities to explore more progressive tax, and we should tax the rich more, because if we do a flat tax on everybody, folks on District 4 are at a disadvantage because their income's already lower than the average of Tacoma residents as a whole. So I would look into more progressive funding, more state grants and opportunities to partners with state agencies that are giving out these infrastructure funding and grants, and talk to business owners around, and like I said earlier in our conversation, talk to business owners who are in high traffic corridors, and how we can improve safety for their businesses so they can get more foot traffic too. So there's just so many opportunities, so many ideas to explore, but the best thing that we do is bring everybody to the table and have these conversations and get to a general consensus on what we need to do. Oh man, good question. If the measure to increase our tax funding to fund Pierce Transit and public transportation, I would absolutely champion that initiative. I would support it on the council. Even if I'm not on the council, I still support it as a community member, because I know how important its transportation for working families are. And the second half of the question is, what is the city's role in this initiative? I think the city has a huge responsibility to inform and educate the public, to tell the stories of folks who take public transportation every day to get to work, to get to school, or to get to friends, or just to be social and just to be able to move around the county. So I think it's a huge responsibility for the city to advocate for this funding, and also do effective outreach. And what does that mean, effective outreach? Me as a communications person, what that means to me is to strategize and tell stories. So to reiterate, I think one of the biggest responsibilities for the city is, especially if we have council members and if the city supports an initiative, to bring it to the voters to decide if they want to, increase taxes to fund public transportation. I think the city's role is outreach and communication to inform the public how important it is to invest in our infrastructure and to be as most informative as you can, and then just tell real world stories. I would, identify folks who take the bus. I'm sure Downtown On the Go has, community connections with other organizations, and know of folks who ride the bus to take to work every day. And then when you tell the stories and have people relate to the journey of everyday working folks, I think that will affect and reach people a little better. And then, just explain to why it's important that we invest in our communities, because the way we move forward and uplift all communities is to keep these investments flowing, and then put on the ballot and let the voters decide. I think we have a responsibility as leaders, as government, to inform the community on how important these investments are. So we can't really blame the community if we do a bad job and then of not explaining on how important these initiatives and these small tax increases are for our community, because I know a lot of families are struggling today, struggling to pay their bills, and a tax burden on any family is going to be tough, but we have to think about the long term, and eventually when we invest in our community, costs will always be cheaper in the long run. So that's what I would absolutely do, and that's what I think the city's role is. Oh man, I think I touched on this earlier, but I'll say it again. When talking to my neighbors during this campaign, I don't want to talk about my campaign, but just talking to my neighbors, knocking on these doors, what I've heard the most is speeding, especially in the neighborhood I live in. I live on McKinley and 54th, right across the street from Sheridan, where there's like a straight line of road, and there's only this intersection where there's only 2 stop signs. So I think we need to add 2 more stop signs, because people go through that stop sign all the time. But what I'm hearing from our neighbors, is that people are driving too fast, right? They're driving too fast in not like McKinley or the big road, but the small inner streets where, people live. And I see that all the time where, one of my sister-in-law's car got hit by a speeding person, and she was just parked. So what I would do is, look at the data, see where all the traffic, the highest risk streets are prone to accidents, potential risk of accidents, and advocate to fund more safety infrastructure, like more lighting, for example. I'm a big fan of roundabouts. I think we need a roundabout where I live, where there's only 2 stop signs, where I think there should be 4. More speed bumps. I think speed bumps are super effective, and just more. I think more community outreach on the safety and dangers of speeding. There's been several times near my house, right in front of my house, where we have kids who are doing I don't know what they're called. They're donuts, right? They're donuts, and there's a word for that thing where they come and they just do it. And burnouts, yeah, it happens quite a bit. And then I wake up in the morning, you can see that. So I think a good way to prevent that is just more roundabouts and more speed bumps within residential streets. I know these things cost a lot of money, but we have to find the funding to invest in our safety, and I think that's one of the pressing things that I've heard from our community members. Is just people just are driving too fast, and I think as far as street traffic safety, too many people are on their phones while driving too. That's a huge issue. I'm riding on the bus every day to work. I'm looking, people drive. You can probably look out here now and see somebody on the phone while they drive. So what can we do to kind of enforce these laws? Because you're not supposed to be on your phone, right? Trying to find a balance of enforcement without punishing, because people make mistakes. I'm guilty of being on my phone when I'm on my car too, and I have to do better as well. But yeah, one of the most pressing issues that I would address is speeding in our inner roads next to our neighborhood communities, and that's the big ones. And like I said earlier, better lighting, perhaps more stop signs, 4-way stops, and roundabouts and speed bumps. Yeah, my goals around transportation. I would love to see the Climate Commitment Act program of offering youth free rides on transit and ferries in the state of Washington, especially in Thurston County and here in Tacoma District 4 too, to expand programs like that to offer free bus services for everybody in our community that needs it the most. I know my kids highly benefit from CCA. In riding free transit, I can see the value and benefit on how, we were just talking about connection and how we can get connected to public transportation. So I would love to see how our state, how our county, how our city can work together to find ways to bring free public transit for everybody in our community. And that would be the cherry on top.